It's probably the same advice that I give most people, and that is get out there and meet as many people as you possibly can, right? Like there are so many different networks where you can get on and have a random meeting with a guy for 45 minutes each week, right? Like I never took advantage of that
Mm,
until recently. And I mean, it's been transformative because, you move from having this small circle that you're surrounded with to really broadening like your understanding of the world and, what's going on in other places and other industries. And, it's amazing how you could be talking with somebody in England that's in, chemistry and how that actually ends up relating back to like, hey, how restaurants manage, inventory or whatever it may be. So yeah, getting out and talking to as many people as possible.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Matt Wampler. And Matt grew up initially dealing with, and probably still dealing with, but dyslexia and a bit of ADHD. And so was entering into the high school with a lower reading level and had to deal with that. Was able to overcome that and went to University of Iowa. And then after graduating, purchased a failing Jimmy John's franchise and was able to turn that around. So made that successful, as well as opened up several additional units of the franchise, and then went off to grad school and got a finance degree. And then after graduating, worked for a couple corporations. Saw an opportunity to improve the restaurant business with technology. Did a whole bunch of research and market analysis, and started the current business, which is what he's doing today. So, with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Matt.
Hey, Devin, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So I just took a much longer journey and condensed it into the 30-second or 45-second, whatever it was, version. But maybe to rewind things a bit, why don't you share with the audience how your journey got started in high school with dealing with dyslexia and ADHD?
Yeah, so really, I was severely dyslexic growing up. So I think I went into high school with close to a third grade reading level, and you end up developing a different set of skills, right? You learn how to think outside the box and solve, problems that, you know, normally you'd just be able to read and find the answer. And so I think that kind of put me on a little bit more of an entrepreneurial journey because I looked at the world a little differently and solved problems a little differently. And ultimately, when you're not the best at reading, you tend to avoid big corporate jobs where you're going to be writing a lot of memos, and instead you gravitate more towards things like restaurants where you're on your feet, you're moving, you're actually doing things. And so yeah, that's what motivated me to get into the restaurant industry.
So now you went off you got through high school, even though it had the, I don't know, I want to say handicap, but that sounds like you had the disadvantage in some areas of with reading and dyslexia, but you're able to graduate, went off to college to, I think it was University of Iowa, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so then you're coming out, what was the degree that you got in college?
I got a marketing degree. I was not the best student out there. But yeah, ultimately, I'd been around Jimmy John's because I grew up in Champaign, Illinois, where the company's headquartered, and I was always drawn to it. And I happened to find a location out at the University of Maryland where the guy had basically run the thing into the ground, and he wanted to get out of the lease, and he's like looking for a patsy to sign on the dotted line. And I'm like, look, I'm 21, I have no assets, I'd love to give it a shot.
So two questions, because I just think that's interesting. One is, so how did you become aware of so coming out of it or college, you have the marketing degree and you kind of have that as a background, but how did you even become aware of a failing Jimmy John's, and then what, and you said, well, it's failing. I have no experience in this industry. I don't really have anything to lose. So why not? Let's just go ahead and try it out. So how did you kind of make that transition?
You know what? My senior year of college, I decided I wanted to do Jimmy John's. And, I looked for some financial partners. Obviously, I didn't have very much money, so I would need somebody to back me. And, through that process of looking at different markets and where you'd open one up, I found the list of, stores for sale. And this one just had all the right problems, right? It was in the great location, but it was just being mismanaged. And so it was the ideal candidate for me to kind of go into. And I give great credit to Jimmy John's and, the systems they've built because, you know, they've got a great playbook. And all my job was to go in and execute it. The fact that you could take a 21-year-old kid that, doesn't really know much about the restaurant industry and
Mhm.
give them that playbook and that they could be successful, I think is less of a testament to me and more of a testament to Jimmy John's and their systems and procedures.
No, it makes sense. Always nice to come into it or something where you have less experience or background and have that system and procedure and something to act as a foundation that gives you a better likelihood of success. So now so you got into that, you had the success, or you followed their plan, their system, and were able to turn things around. And I think you mentioned made that successful. And then with that, I think you leverage that to open a few other chains or a few other franchises. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I ended up opening up another 3 or 4 units, Jimmy John's, and it really wasn't that simple on the turnaround side, right? Like there's a lot of guys that are smart, right? And they let's say work smarter, not harder. I was in the work harder side of things. So I quickly found myself working 10 of the 14 shifts a week. They're each 12 hours. So like you're working 120 hours a week. You're sleeping in the back of the store, between shifts. But again, follow the playbook and we're successful.
Makes perfect sense. So you follow the playbook, grew a future franchises. Now, one other question. I know I'm backing up slightly in your journey, but I just had one other question, which was, if you had no assets, really had no experience, I get maybe no experience. You say, okay, they're young, they're hungry, and I'm just trying to look for a patsy. But how do you get someone to basically give you a franchise when you really have no ability to pay them, but you have no assets that they can leverage?
Yeah, and that goes back to growing up around the Jimmy John's community, and I think my dad probably signed on the dotted line as a guarantor for the franchise. I don't remember exactly how it all went down. I do remember opening the second unit and getting everything in my name. The corporations in my name, the leases in my name personally, the loans, and it was something that I was really yeah, it meant a lot to me.
No, that's awesome. Though. It sounds like it was a great opportunity. So now you're coming out and saying, okay, I've done those or turned around one, opened up a few other franchises. Now, what made you decide to switch gears and go back to school and kind of, get the graduate degree?
Yeah, and this is kind of where it goes back to thinking a little bit differently. Um, I the same playbook that allowed me to be successful is also the reason that I ultimately ended up leaving. And that is like 90% of the stuff is just going in every day and executing and having flawless execution. And
Mm,
I loved the 10% of things that, were creative, where there wasn't a playbook for, right? Where you had to come up with those interesting, novel solutions. And I just found myself thinking like, look, I would rather be spending 90% of my time coming up with new solutions and 10% of my time executing instead of the other way around.
no, makes sense. So now you go back, you say, okay, so just or did you so when you went back to graduate school, did you sell off the franchises?
Yeah, I
Did you keep
sold the
them?
franchises, went back to grad school. I- it was during grad school that I got my first real exposure into analytics and modeling and all that kind of stuff, and it really stuck with me. And I went off and did a corporate job doing innovation in a medical device company, and ultimately I really liked the analytics side of things. And
Mm,
so I found myself, teaching myself to code, doing some online classes, right? And it was just a light bulb clicked. Like, you know, in some ways, coding's just putting your thoughts down in code. And
right.
it really like, I guess one of the big things that clicked was I spent so many hours working on Excel files at the end of the night, trying to keep everything up to date, and missed out on dinners with my wife and kids. And
Mm,
it was like, man, if someone had just written a few lines of code, I wouldn't have had to do any of this. And so I said, like, look, you know, I wonder if there's an opportunity to, be able to bring some of these modern technological solutions to restaurants who really do need them. And I called up some really smart tech guys, my co-founder Osa, who I owe, a ton of credit to. And we dove into this, and we found the same tools that I was using, a decade ago are still being used. And so, we ended up doing a partnership with Duke and brought on 18 grad students doing their masters of quantitative management and turned them loose on all this data. And, we really found two things. One, that food waste as a result of over prepping each day was a far bigger problem than we ever anticipated, and two, that machine learning did a really good job of solving that. And so with that in place, we decided to go pursue this. And ultimately, the goal of what we're doing is to help restaurants you know systemize good decision making,
mm.
because in restaurants there's 100 ways to lose money. There's very few ways to be successful. The analogy we like to use is a leaking cup. Imagine you had a cup with a bunch of holes in it that's slowly leaking water out. You know what what restaurant managers do every day is they come in and they make you know 50 to 100 decisions, all
Mhm.
trying to just basically plug those little holes. So how can we create the using machine learning and AI, that decision management system to help improve those decision makings?
So now let me just jump in because that's a little bit of where you're at today, and definitely want to circle back to that. But between that, so you went to grad school, and then I think you went and worked for a couple different corporations before you decided, hey, I think there's the opportunity to do technology, do it different in the restaurant industry. So what were the corporations that you worked with during that or period between grad school and
Yeah,
what you're
and
doing today?
I'm not going to name them, but it probably wasn't the best fit for me. I went from running my own business to jumping into the corporate world, and I tend to say things that like I see them. And yeah, it was a great learning experience for me, and I think it's shaped my perspective moving forward.
So I'll without having to name them, and I definitely get that sensitivity there. What was at least the industries that you worked in? Could I get at least that much?
Medical devices.
Okay. So you worked in the medical device industry, and I think that one that's a interesting industry, and it has to have the right fit. You have to see if whether it fits you and whether or not you like it. But you're working in that industry, and so when you're looking to make the jump to the business and the technology you're looking to develop today, was it just, hey, I've got a light bulb moment? I worked in Jimmy John's these years ago, and I think I like to circle back to that, or I see an opportunity, or was it somebody that approached you? Kind of, how did you go from medical devices to, hey, I'm going to go build technology for restaurants? Kind of what was that transition, or what was the genesis there?
Yeah, so the company did cutbacks and got rid of a bunch of the director level positions, and so you quickly found yourself unemployed, and that was about 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. So
Mm.
timing was not great there, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It really allowed me to go in and sharpen up the skill set that I wanted, which would have been that programming and analytics side of things. And yeah, I mean, the rest is history.
Awesome. So you go in, you build that out, and I assume you kind of built your first iteration, your first model. Now, industries, I don't know what the restaurant industry is. If I base it off anything like the legal industry, a lot of times you're dealing with people that have done it for a long way, for a long period of time. And even though it's inefficient, doesn't work as well, they're saying, hey, I'm set in my ways. I don't really want to change or have to or try something out new. So was it one where people were just hungering for a solution? You came in and everybody wanted to use it, or was it a slower build and you had to figure out how to sell it and who would buy it, or kind of how did it go as you started out?
Look, we're still figuring out a lot of that. It's a never-ending journey. Um, but in restaurants, it's all about change management and implementation. They have such little bandwidth to take on new things, right? And there's pushback from, you know, everyone in the organization. And so we spent most of our time trying to figure out how to make this as, and I hate the word seamless, but right, like, how do we make this so that you want to use it, right?
Mm,
Not you have to use it. So we see a lot of guys out there trying to, one of the things we really focus on is reducing food waste, right? Because it's bad, it's horrible for the environment, and it's also really not good for the profitability of the business. So it's an efficiency problem,
mm.
right? And so like we see people do scales, right, where they weigh and track everything, or logging stuff. And like we came about it with a different tact where it's like, all right, how can we make this as easy for the customer as possible? And that ultimately led to using their data.
Mm. So no, and I get that, you're still early on in the journey. To give the audience kind of an idea about how long have you guys been in business and how long you've been on this part of your
Yeah,
journey?
so we've been working on this for a couple of years now. We got a full-time team of 9 people at this point. We're building all of these solutions. We actually have a big announcement coming up next week. I guess this will be published next week. So we're launching our automated onboarding platform, which is going to allow the same technology that we've used with our enterprise level customers with the small businesses of the world, because frankly it's expensive and time consuming to build out these machine learning models, and being able to you know take the tools that the enterprise guys have and be able to give them to that mom and pop or the guy who's running the bagel shop, right? Like
Mm.
I'm really excited for that.
No, it's always fun. One, it's always fun to launch a new tool to expand or to update the business. Now it's also usually pretty nerve-wracking in the sense that, you never quite know how it's going to go, and you test it out, you try and figure it out, and then you or sit back and see how it actually goes. So, or good luck on the launch. Hopefully it goes well and it is well received and well adopted. So. Well, now as we've kind of caught up to the present day of kind of where the business is at, and even a little bit the teaser as to where it's headed in the near term future, it's always a great time to transition to the 2 questions I ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
So the worst business decision I ever made was I opened up a restaurant in a bad area. Right? It didn't perform very well. And the reason it was the worst decision was not because, I opened up in the wrong spot. That happens. It
Mm,
was that I had the wrong mental framing. So I basically said, like, look, if I'm going to be doing this brand in this area, this makes sense for me to pursue it. And it was kind of, I don't want to say it was small minded, but it was like, you didn't think of all of the other possibilities that you could have
mm.
done, right? And you just kind of put yourself in this one way of thinking, and that I always kind of regretted.
Hey, no, it definitely makes sense, and
Do
it's
I get
fun.
to turn it on you? What's the worst business decision you've ever made?
I don't know if that's ever been turned back on me. I'm happy to let me. Now you're catching me off guard, which is hard to do. I don't know that it's the worst decision. I'd have to think about that one. I'll give you one of the decisions, which it's kind of worse, but it turned out well in the end, which was, one of the earlier on. So I started one of my first businesses. It started while I was pursuing my MBA degree as well as my law degree. So I started it's in the wearable technology industry. It originally started in hydration. Now it's evolved into diabetes monitoring. But over that course, as we were getting it up and running, I was basically doing two full-time jobs. So I was doing the law practice or being an attorney for another firm, and then I was also running the startup and with the several other people on board and pursuing those. fast forward a bit. So we got with the legal practice, I was doing some of the IP work with that firm as well as with another client, and the other client was or had a relationship with my dad. So I don't know, incestuous sounds bad, but it was certainly a relationship. That client got mad because they thought, hey, they had a completely different technology, but they said, hey, if we could, you're having access to our technology, and so you're going to leverage what you know on this side to do this side. Completely false, baseless, and honestly, they were just frustrated, wanted to exit the business, and wanted to try and leverage the startup that I was working with to try and get a quick payout, and then exit the business. So all of that said, it made for a headache and a mess for me. And so it was one where I spent, probably a good year of my life going through heck and just dealing with all the frivolous lawsuits and going back and forth, and all the business partners like, well, you're an attorney, you can figure this out, right? This is not a problem for him. Like, it takes a lot of my time, my mental, emotional, and I'm getting served with lawsuits and I'm having to deal with other attorneys. It's not fun at all. Long story short is what we ended up doing is, so the company that was doing the frivolous lawsuit, we ended up just acquiring them for literally pennies on the dollar, folding it into what we were doing, selling it off, and it made for a good end result. But so I don't know if it's a mistake in the sense that, it wasn't something that I did wrong, but it was certainly, when I look back, as far as, I guess the only mistake I would have learned is, if I could have anticipated, I would have let the other client know, hey, I'm working on this other startup that's unrelated to yours, that that you think that is it gives you an opening to do a frivolous lawsuit. But I don't know if it's a mistake, but it was the first one that came to mind of a difficult period during the business, which I learned a lot about how you have to deal with other people and lawsuits and that. And I don't typically get into a lot of lawsuits. I love to do the getting the patents and the trademark. So you turned the question on me. That was the first thing that came to mind. I don't know if it's the worst business decision, but it's certainly one of the more memorable ones.
It's funny. It's rarely the decisions that we make that are the worst mistakes. It's the
Mm.
decisions that we didn't make. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure I've already forgotten the great opportunities that I've squandered by not acting.
Mm. No, and I'm definitely right there with you. And I think that, I think it's also where I thought you were going to say, and I think a lot of times it's the decisions that others make for us that sometimes is the worst decisions, or the ones that we have to deal with more often than not. And so I think that one's one where you sometimes you're forced to learn, or forced to go through things that you wouldn't rather do. But when you come through out the other side, a lot of times it's a great opportunity. So I think that lots of things to learn from along your journey. So now I'm going to ask the second question, which is, if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
It's probably the same advice that I give most people, and that is, get out there and meet as many people as you possibly can. Right? Like, there are so many different networks where you can get on and have a random meeting with a guy for 45 minutes each week, right? Like, I never took advantage of that
Mm.
until recently. And I mean, it's been transformative because, you move from having this small circle that you're surrounded with to really broadening like your understanding of the world and, what's going on in other places and other industries. And, it's amazing how you could be talking with somebody in England that's in, chemistry, and how that actually ends up relating back to, like, hey, how restaurants manage, inventory, or whatever it may be. So yeah, getting out and talking to as many people as possible.
No, I think that's definitely a great piece of advice and a great takeaway. And I think it's one where people know they should get out and network. And it's usually figuring out one, I think you have to figure out how you feel comfortable networking. Not everybody likes to go to the big networking events. Not everybody likes to play golf. Not everybody likes to do a podcast. And so you have to feel what you're comfortable with and where are the avenues that you can actually go out and network. But I think that making those connections, and whether it's long term, you have a business opportunity with them, it's referrals, it's just expanding your network, being able to refer clients over to them, asking for advice and mentorship. There's a lot of things that I think come with networking that oftentimes, if you don't take advantage of it, you miss out. So I think that's a great piece of
Well,
advice.
and I draw a distinction between networking and building relationships. So, networking, going out and just, transactionally, like, talking to people, it's great. I mean, I'm sure you learn some things, but really it's, how do I go out and make meaningful relationships with people that the next time somebody needs like web design, right? Like it's like, hey, you need to go talk to so and so. Like they do a great job, right?
Mm.
Bringing people together. I feel like networking gets a bad name.
No, and I agree. And I think the reason it gets a bad name is because everybody comes to buy those awkward events where everybody's going there just trying to pitch their services and hoping somebody else will say that's exactly what I need, and then pay you for it and cut you a check, and that's what everybody is just doing self-interested. And I think that that's what everybody's like, I don't want to do that. But I think that there's a lot of more opportunities and things out there that people oftentimes, because it has a bad name, they never take advantage of. So love the piece of advice. So. Well, with that, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, if they're in the restaurant industry and they want to be a customer, or want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
First off, get on our website, clearcogs.com. You can schedule a meeting right there, or send me an email. My email is matt@clearcogs.com. I'm happy to talk with anybody. Sure, I'm going to get a lot of spam now, but especially anybody in the restaurant industry, there's nothing I enjoy more than talking with operators. But yeah, no, feel free to reach out on the website or send me an email.
Awesome. Well, definitely encourage people to reach out, make a new connection, as we said, or network, and make a new best friend. And hopefully nobody, or not too many people, will spam you. That's always a chore in and of itself to reduce the spam in life generally. So awesome.
Google
Well,
does a
with that,
decent job.
well, with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome episodes. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, we'd love to help. Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we are always here to help. Well, thank you again, Matt, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Devin, thanks for having me.